Hey guys, what is this weird bronze object? Is it some kind of ancient tool? What was its purpose? Could it be used for divination? Some of you might know the answer already. In fact, these objects have been puzzling scientists for quite a while now because nobody really knows what they are or what they were used for. The only thing that we know is that there are plenty of them out there and that they all have 12 sides. These are called the Roman Dodecahedrons, and we will take a closer look at them in today's episode of Fake Tank Thursday. As usual, I'm afraid I cannot show you the original objects since many of them are lost or destroyed, and the ones which are still around are mostly locked up in museums behind bulletproof glass. But fear not, because over the years people have created some wonderful replicas, and those we will be looking at today. What makes the dodecahedrons so difficult to classify is the fact that they don't seem to fit into any of our established categories. They are certainly not weapons, but they also don't seem to be anything else we would recognize as a tool. We don't think they are weights either, since there are no holes for attaching a hook, and their shape is far too irregular for use as a balance weight. Some people believe that they could be dice, but that doesn't really make much sense either. Why would these be made of bronze, not stone or bone? And even if they were used as dice, where are the numbers? If you want to play a game with your friends, you need to know what each side represents, don't you? This is why most scholars agree that whatever they were used for, the dodecahedrons must have been part of a system where the user already knew what each side meant. It's like playing rock, paper, scissors. You don't need a die to tell you that rock beats lizard. Since they were found in so many places, it has been argued that the dodecahedrons could represent something abstract such as a constellation, an astrological sign, or a stage in a ritual. In fact, the idea that they could be star maps is rather popular among conspiracy theorists who also claim that secret societies used them for space travel. Yep, that's right. Before you click away, let me explain. The two most famous dodecahedrons are known as the horologion of Philistion and the horologion of Nicanor. Both names refer to the astronomer who supposedly invented them. The first one was supposedly given to Julius Caesar, and the second one to Augustus. We actually know what these objects were supposed to represent because there is an inscription on one of them which translates to the whole of astronomy. So it seems pretty clear that these devices were used for astronomical calculations. This is also backed up by other ancient sources which mention astronomical instruments called astrolabes. These can still be seen in museums today, though I doubt that anyone has ever used them to navigate the cosmos. While they are similar to the dodecahedrons, astrolabes are more complex instruments. The simplest ones are flat discs with markings used to determine the position of the stars and planets. The more complex ones are globes that contain moving parts, allowing the user to simulate the movement of the celestial bodies. This brings us back to the dodecahedrons. Do they represent the whole of astronomy or just a part of it? Does the whole of astronomy mean the sky as it appears from Earth, or does it mean the universe as a whole? A map showing the constellations would make sense, but why would you need one when you could just look up and see them yourself? If you wanted to calculate eclipses or other astronomical phenomena, you wouldn't need a map either. Instead, you would need a device that shows the paths of the planets, the sun, and the moon. An astrolabe would be suitable for this, but would a dodecahedron work as well? The horologion of Philistion and the horologion of Nicanor both have 12 sides, just like most dodecahedrons. But there is another device attributed to Philistion which is different from the previous two. It is also called the horologion, but has 36 sides. If we assume that all of these objects are related, then it is obvious that 12 is not a random number. It corresponds to the number of signs of the zodiac. So the dodecahedrons could represent the zodiac, but what about the other two horoscopes? Perhaps they correspond to the 12 hours of daylight in summer and winter, respectively. This fits nicely with the fact that these astronomical instruments were often used to tell the time. But unfortunately, it leaves us with another question. If the simpler horoscopes measure only 12 hours each, how can the horologion contain the whole of astronomy? It has therefore been suggested that instead of showing the positions of the signs, the horoscopes showed their corresponding decans. These are groups of stars which form the boundaries between the signs. This means that the dodecahedrons would not be used to tell the time, but to tell the date. This explanation fits nicely with other archaeological findings. For example, the Roman poet Ovid mentions a practice called the decis in his book of astronomy called Astronomica. The decis was a method used to determine the date of the next full moon. To do this, one had to find the constellation which opposed the moon in the sky. Then one looked up on the opposite side and counted how many constellations they could see until reaching a cluster of stars called the Pleiades. The distance between the moon and the Pleiades was then converted into days, and that gave you the dices. In other words, it told you how many days you had to wait for the next full moon. This process was facilitated by objects like the dodecahedrons, which helped the observer locate the constellation that opposed the moon. Of course, this is just speculation based on the limited evidence available, but I think it fits quite nicely with what we know about the dodecahedrons. There is, however, another possibility, and that is that the faces of the dodecahedrons represented the months of the year. This would also explain why the horoscope has 360 sides instead of 36. This fits nicely with other calendars used at the time, such as the lunisolar calendar used by the Egyptians and the Greeks. Their calendar also had 12 months, though they associated them with the signs of the zodiac. We have already talked about the Greek calendar in a previous episode, so I won't bore you with details, but if you are interested in learning more about it, then be sure to check out the link in the description below. The main reason that this explanation is so appealing is that it neatly explains the origin of the dodecahedrons. Scholars have long wondered why the Romans used a 12-sided figure as their symbol. But if you think about it, this is a pretty dumb question, since we know perfectly well why they chose the number 12. All they did was copy the Greeks. There is nothing special about the number 12. It is just a convention. I think that there is little doubt that the dodecahedrons were used for astronomical calculations, but the exact method varied depending on the instrument. The simpler devices simply showed the positions of certain constellations, perhaps the signs of the zodiac or their corresponding decans. The horologion, on the other hand, was a more complex instrument used to calculate dates and times. Unfortunately, none of the dodecahedrons have survived intact, so we can only speculate how they worked. But why would ancient astronomers go through all the trouble of creating such a strange object? Wouldn't it have been easier to just look up at the sky? The answer, of course, is that it would have been impossible to accurately predict eclipses and other phenomena without such an aid. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. Let's not forget that the dodecahedrons were not used to predict future events, but rather to cast light on existing ones. In other words, they were used to observe the sky, not to plan voyages through it. That's why I find the idea that secret societies use them for space travel so ridiculous. If these objects were used for anything other than astronomy, we would probably have found traces of this in ancient texts. But we haven't, and that's why I think that this theory is dead on arrival. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you liked it, please leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Thanks again, and I will see you next week.